Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With us today is Chris Rosini, our co-host. Chris, welcome to the program.
Great to be with you again, Dr. Paul.
Very good. And we have an interesting subject today. It's a subject that a lot of people, especially our program, talked about it in generalities about 2 or 3 years now. That has to do with COVID. But you know, there's a story now out floating around. COVID's back. Is it going to be the same as before? And even Peter McCullough admits that it is back. But when you look at it, it's not back with a vengeance, and you got to look at it in perspective. And that's what he does. He tries to say, yes, it is, and don't let them use this as an excuse to reinstitute these mandates. And I think we have a head start on this episode compared to 3 years ago when the scare tactics worked and people became terrorized by all the false propaganda. So this time the numbers have gone up and it's back, but it's modified. But I think the interesting thing, Chris, that Dr. McCullough points out is a lot of this, the variants are coming back, but he believes and he supports the position that a lot of this prolongation and the lack of predictability as a virus is predictable to a degree in other circumstances, that it comes back is because there were so many vaccines and so many booster shots that it has caused this modification, and now there is a return. That's not to say that there should be no concern, because unfortunately some people can get sick from this. But compared to what was happening before, this should not be bad because there's so many people speaking out. There's a lot of evidence that the mandates are not going to come flying back. The people are wiser. But I did see, even this morning, that I don't know if we've reached the White House, because Biden says, boy, this is serious, there's an epidemic, we better get prepared. Matter of fact, he's been preparing. They've already ordered the vaccines. That's what's so disgusting about the whole thing. And I kept thinking, they've ordered the vaccines, they probably have been delivered, they probably have gotten their money, and they don't really care if anybody gets sick or anybody gets better, because the job of keeping the pharmaceutical industry financially healthy, not wise, but financially they're well off. So this is something that I think is interesting, and I feel good that we can at least say it doesn't have to be like before. But we were even arguing 2 or 3 years ago that it doesn't have to be overblown and overtreated and try to react to something you didn't have the evidence. And then we discovered, well, the real goal for some of them was to make sure that we could set back science. You can't depend on science. Science doesn't tell us the truth. And to me, the worst part of what went on back then was they told people that natural immunity wasn't worth anything and you need all these vaccines. And how so many physicians bought into that, but they had other pressures on them, like their jobs and whatnot, prestige. That helped convince people they had to go along with it. But anyway, I still think it's important. We talk about it and try to calm it down a little bit, but not to say forget about it, because some people who now get it may well. If they go to a good doctor who does an evaluation, they may qualify for steroids, they may qualify for antibiotics. But if it's individualized and the doctor and the patient get together and talk over all the pros and cons, that's the way medicine is supposed to work. Chris.
Yes, Dr. Paul, it's a shame that we have to talk about this again, because it really has disappeared from our lives. And, the peak was when it was shown that the vaccines did not work. Before that, all we heard was variant this. They were showing all these tickers with the number of cases, and this variant, that variant, don't worry, Big Pharma's working on another vaccine. And then they were implementing, some cities actually did it, New York, Philadelphia, vaccine passports. where you had to prove that you were up to date, so-called. But once it was shown that they didn't work, then it all disappeared. And then I haven't even heard the word variant ever since, and all of a sudden, here come variants again. And, it's not surprising that these authoritarians, they had so much power that they loved that, of course, they are going to want it again. And, it's not just them, and I mentioned this yesterday. It's all the neighborhood tyrants that we had to deal with. It wasn't just Washington. They would go on TV, say something, and then you had to deal with your neighbors who went crazy, So we have to really be vigilant this time because, and we have to use that magical word, that all-powerful word, no, because they will try. That's just the nature of the beast, to keep pushing. They have no brakes. But the break is when enough people say no, and then that's it. They're forced to stop because they're outnumbered. So, we should be optimistic, but, the fact that they're trying to float this out there again to try to hook us, we have to be very vigilant against it.
Very good. I want to read a couple quotes from Dr. McCullough, who did develop a very reliable reputation for looking at the COVID government-created crisis and became a believer. A lot of doctors suffered so much, and he did too. He was attacked, but he has survived because he's still writing about what's happening. And he makes a comment about what's going on right now. And I just want to quote this from Dr. McCullough. Not only did this approach fail before, that we're talking about today, it actually extended the pandemic. We must not repeat the mistakes of the past. Of course, that's what we're talking about, and we congratulate Dr. McCullough for his efforts. And here he's saying, I want to make a few points. Quote, mass indiscriminate vaccination appears to have prolonged the pandemic and led to more variants. The new XBB failed booster shot is too late, and now they're giving those with only 4.7% of the strains and declining. The shots are not any safer than the original one. So, but who's being safe? Is it the people who are making money off it? So if they can concoct something, just think of the flip-flop. Think of the flip-flops, for Fauci. One time he said that natural immunity was okay, and then the next time he do this, switch it around. So their goals are different than ours. So from their viewpoint, many of them are saying, hey, this is very successful. It's doing exactly what we expected. So I am delighted that we can read these stories. Another one that I liked it came from the governor of Mississippi, and this is a great statement he made. This came on Zero Hedge. Quote, never going back. Governor refuses to implement COVID mask mandate. So he's with us all along, and he was careful and said, if you want to take them, you want to wear the mask to protect yourself, but no mandates. And it was very, very adamant. And I keep thinking that it's great that he's on target with this, but I know there's going to be a lot more governors that are going to say the same thing. So that's why the more the people that speak out, the more likely they're going to head this off. And when Biden said, we got to be prepared, and like he's already prepared, he's probably already sent the vaccines around the country. So this is good. There's a lot more attention given in a positive way, and I think that will help us make sure that it's treated more like medical treatment should be done. It's not to say, be blasé and say, forget it, they lied to us before, just ignore it. It shouldn't be ignored. But the sorting out should be a lot differently than doing it between a sick person in a hospital with a mask on that he didn't need and a bureaucrat telling him what he's allowed to do. Now, it should boil down to a discussion between a patient who is sick and goes to a doctor that they trust, and then try to sort it out with the current events. What we learned before, which we should have learned even before the last epidemic that occurred these past 3 years, and it can't be sorted out. And they say, well, that'll be imperfect. Patients, are different, and they'll have different complaints, have different pressures. Well, that's why there should be a discussion. All those things that went on at the beginning, there were some unknowns about COVID, but they weren't the people involved weren't allowed to talk about it. If you talked about an alternative to the mandate from the government, especially the federal government and the international governments, you get in big trouble, and you can lose your livelihood and whatnot. So I think we're much better off now, but we should not let our guard down, because they're willing to try it again. Matter of fact, when this was going on in the last couple of years, we have to mention on this program, watch out. Their goal isn't treating patients. Their goal is power and money. And when you realize that, you figure we better stay vigilant and make sure that people have freedom of choice and not dictated by a bunch of people who don't care about honesty in anything, let alone in medicine.
Right, Dr. Paul. And, it's important to keep in mind that the same liars are in place. And, in this case, the liar is a strong word, but it is well deserved because it was all lies. With the 15 days to stop, the curve, whatever the heck it was, the stay home to stop the spread was a lie, the social distancing was nonsense, the masks were nonsense, the safe and effective vaccines, which we saw everywhere. I even remember seeing billboards. Well, they weren't safe and they weren't effective. So, but all the same people are still in place, whether in government, whether CDC, FDA, WHO, the media, they're all still there. Some of them have disappeared from sight, like Gates and Fauci and Walensky and remember Lena Wen. They'd all be on TV, and then when the whole thing came apart, they all scattered and you never saw them again. Will they be back on TV, or will there be a new cast of people? We don't know these things. But we have to also remember what government did, the side that they took. At the very least, we're libertarian. We believe in very minimal government. But at the very least, protect us against force and fraud. If somebody gives you a product that does not work, or that injures you, or that kills you, you should be able to have recourse with the government and, to punish these companies. But the government gave them total immunity. So it didn't, if you died, were injured, there's no recourse. This is not how government is supposed to operate. I mean, even in a libertarian society, this is basic stuff. They're supposed to at least protect us against harm. But, government gave them immunity and they got away with it. So why would anybody in their right minds listen to the same people if they try to pull this again?
Very good. Here's another warning that I noticed this morning. This comes from the Brownstone Institute. And the title on this, which the article does appear on Zero Hedge, is whose, and we know who they are, the World Health Organization, proposed amendments will increase man-made pandemics. And that says so much. Why are we in who? What do they know? But they're around, they've been around, and they're going to save the world from disease, and yet they're conspiring to do something quite opposite to that. And the proposed amendments, instead of helping anybody, there's belief by those at the Brownstone that there's evidence to show that it will increase the pandemics. And there should be reassurance when the reassurance is an honest reassurance. You don't panic. Sometimes the panic and the fear is much worse than the disease. Certainly that is the case of those last 3 years dealing with COVID. The treatment was much worse than anything. How many times do we hear, even today, complications, and you're not even allowed to properly, report some of the deaths and illnesses right now that might be related, to COVID. The reporting was distorted. They did that before, and they're still doing this because there are complications. But the truth is I don't know, I don't think anybody knows exactly how serious the complications are. But I tell you what, statistics can be important on such things like this. But if you have 100 people having similar symptoms, but you avoid testing to see whether they had a vaccine given to them, that distorts the whole thing. That study isn't worth anything. And that's why you don't want to expand the bureaucracy. So we have local bureaucracies and state by bureaucracies. We have national bureaucracies, and we have these international bureaucracies like WHO that think that they can sort this out too, and they have another agenda which you're not allowed to talk about because it sounds like you're conspiring against the world. Well, what are they doing when they keep it secret? Why don't we just settle that little argument and just to say, discussion and a contest between ideas is permissible and necessary. That's the way medicine and that's the way science works. It has been said, I believe it, when there's a scientific discovery made, it should actually increase curiosity because it raises more and more questions. And that is what is important. So, knowledge is not perfect with a snap of the fingers, but once the knowledge is established, maybe take something like natural immunity, you shouldn't say, oh, we don't deal with that anymore. We're not even going to talk about that. If you do, you're going to be in trouble. So that's why I'm so much against bureaucracy running things, that people as individuals should take care of their own problems. And if you have things that you want to associate, like in medical care, that should be done in a voluntary fashion between the provider of medicine as well as the doctor doing his job. Chris?
Very good, Dr. Paul. I will make my closing statement. And it's actually, I have an optimistic attitude. I hope I'm right with my attitude. I could be wrong. But I do believe that the American people in 2023 are not the same as the American people in 2019. If there's one thing about authoritarians and tyrants, they need to catch their victims off guard. The victims can't have time to think. If you remember, or those of us that remember 9/11, in that emotional moment, they jammed through the Patriot Act. Quick, get it in, while there's fear. And with COVID, it was the same thing. When there was fear, there was emergency use authorization. And it was just a big open door for the government. And it's done at a time when the victims don't have time to think. The victims are scrambling around what's going on, So I think, and I hope I'm right, that restarting COVID tyranny is an uphill battle because years have passed. Their eyes have been opened. They have had time to think back on what was done to them. And I don't think it's going to be an easy thing. You're going to have tons of people who, did not get the jabs and never would. You'll have tons of people that did get the jabs and never would again. You also have the injured from masks and the jabs. You have people who lost loved ones or who know people that were injured. You have people that lost their jobs, their livelihoods. For what? So you have an angry population. It may, we went about our lives, but there's an anger that's out there. And I think that the government has an uphill battle. I'm more worried about something that actually does catch us off guard more than this, but they will try to do this just because that's who they are. And, so we just have to stay vigilant and just keep remembering. It's not too long ago where all this tyranny happened. We have to remember and never forget.
Very good. We talk a lot about the virus itself and the disease and the distortion of the information we get and how you work these things out. Well, I believe the market works it out better than any other way. And I also believe in generosity because there's been a lot of generosity associated with medical care, and it still is done. And there's still a lot of good stuff being done by donations to burn hospitals and all the advancement. It's just been, really great. But the one thing that they don't pay a whole lot of attention to, we're talking about viruses here and variants, and that's what we talked about for 3 years, and how do we treat a disease that we never even proved was a disease, that sort of thing. But I think the conditions of the lockdown made things much difficult in other areas. For instance, there was a total avoidance of dealing with, a secondary illness. What about the psychological damage done to people who are in lockdown? They're still trying to measure that, how much damage, how much harm is done to the kids. That the one thing for sure is their educational, treatment and the way they've received their education has been backfired, has gone backwards. So I think that people realize they don't look at this, and if you look at what's going on at home, and it's related, to the immigration problems and different things, that it relates to mandates. And when you look at the cities that are being turned down, they turn into slums, and you turn it into pollution and what's happening in the cities and what you see in the inner cities of cities and the destruction of a city like San Francisco, in New York. It's just horrible. And there's a lot of health matters there. So putting people out in the street without any facilities, bathroom facilities, as a result of overreacting to this. I mean, we went through World War II, I remember, at the end of the Depression, I remember, and all the ups and downs. And we've had people in poverty and people having problems, but frequently they were helped by local people. But it's never been like this in recent memories. And it's related to this overreaction, and that's why this optimism that we're working on, and Chris spoke so clearly on, is that it doesn't have to be as bad as it was before. We should have learned a whole lot, and the one thing is, people should have a greater confidence that free people acting together and working things out in a voluntary manner is always much better than dictates and mandates and spending money by the government to solve these problems. That is not the answer. Liberty is the answer. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the report. Please come back soon.